Hi, everyone. This is Scott Medina for Sonic Perspectives. Glad to have you with us, and we're going to be chatting right now with Dave Bainbridge. Some of you might know from Iona, some may know from the Strawbs or Lifesigns, or his fantastic solo career. There's so many aspects to you. It's wonderful to have you. Merry Christmas, Dave.
Thanks. Hi, Scott. Yeah, Merry Christmas. Yeah, good to be here. I wish I was there where you are in Boulder, Colorado. So good, fantastic at this time of year.
Well, it is, but with things so weird, and maybe we'll talk about this in the interview too.
Yeah, yeah.
With global changes going on, we've had almost no snow here. It's very bizarre.
Wow.
In fact,
Wow.
it's 60 degrees out today, and we're going to have a warm Christmas instead of a white Christmas. It's
Yeah, it's very odd. Yeah.
very remarkable. So, I mean, even people trying to go skiing, they're just kind of like on man-made snow at this point, and that's about it.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
So
Mm.
it's times are changing.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you with us. There's been a lot going on with you. It's certainly in this past year. I think my personal top 10 list, you're probably on at least three of those albums. So it's
Oh, excellent.
you're like MVP of 2021, I think, just about everywhere. So
Yeah, it was a busy recording year last year, as it turned out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But let's we're going to focus, mostly on the new solo album that you're coming out with, or just released, really.
Mm. Yeah,
And
came out
it's
on the 23rd of November, the
right,
official release date. Yeah.
right, to the far away. And it's interesting for as full a career as you've already had. You're not someone who puts out such an elaborate album every year under your own name. So, like, I'm wondering how it feels for you right now on a personal level as we close out 2021 and with having to the far away having just been released. How does that feel for you?
It's great actually. Yeah, so far. I mean, it's one of the things I've really throughout my career had to kind of balance is how much I spend time working on my own music and how much I spend time working with other people, which often is a lot better paid. So, I've managed to sustain a career for a very long time as a professional musician and composer. Um, but it has been sometimes, I suppose, to the detriment of my own releases. So certainly at this point in life, I'm really wanting to concentrate on what I'm writing myself. And so yeah, To the Faraway is the latest thing, and so far I'm thrilled with the responses to it. Um, it's been absolutely brilliant. So yeah, so hence this interview. I'm doing various interviews for uh, publications and websites and all that at the moment, talking about the album, which is great.
Yeah, well, the album has like such an artistic approach to it, I'd say. We've from what I've gleaned, it was largely inspired by landscapes that you were in, and also by your personal love story. So, you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that for people who may not be in the know on that yet?
Yes, yes. Well, yeah, my now wife Sharon and I were due to be married in March 2020, and I'd just been touring with another band I play with called Lifesigns, and we were coming towards the end of a UK tour when things were kind of ramping up with the pandemic in March last year, um, and I was due to fly out. We had one more gig in the UK, and then I was due to be flying out after that, um, which was a week later. But in the meantime, very, very short notice, the US closed its borders to people from everywhere else, virtually. And so the long and short of it was that we were separated for 8.5 months by the Atlantic Ocean. And it wasn't until I managed to get to the US at the beginning of November last year via Mexico, because people from the US still weren't allowed to travel to the people from the UK was not allowed to travel to the USA in November last year unless they spent 15 nights in a country that wasn't on the US's exclusion list. And we found this amazing Facebook group called Love Is Not Tourism that was put together by a couple who, one from the US and one from the UK, had been separated similarly by the pandemic. And it turned out that there's lots and lots of people in the same boat as us. Some of them had found like third countries that they could fly to and then get to the USA. So that's where the idea came to go to Mexico. Towards the end of October last year, I went. Well, it entailed flying from Heathrow to Frankfurt in Germany, then Frankfurt to Mexico City, spending a night there, and then 14 nights in Cancun in the hurricane season. And there was a direct hit from a Category 2 hurricane while I was there, which was quite interesting. But in the middle of the night, I was having to mop out my room, which was kind of flooding. So, eventually I made it, and we were back together in November, and then happily we were able to get married at the end of December last year. So it's our first wedding anniversary on Monday.
Oh, congratulations! Wow.
So a lot of the album was written during the 8.5 months that we spent apart, and every day I'd go walking or running on the lane that I lived on, which is right out in the countryside. It's a beautiful area in a place called Lincolnshire, which is very flat, but it means that there are really big skies there. And I've always been an avid photographer, so I spent a lot of time photographing the changing light and changing skies and eventually the changing seasons. And also thinking about our story and the separation and eventually the hope of being back together. So all these ideas kind of formulated and eventually became the album To the Faraway, which I suppose documents the story of two lovers being separated by an ocean and basically eventually getting back together. But the album, I wanted it to have a real sense of hope and optimism, and not focus on the negative aspects of the whole pandemic, but to be something that people could feel hopeful about.
And you get to include your photography in the presentation as well.
Yes, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There was a time when I kind of had to make a decision as to whether to go to art college or music college, because I was always interested in drawing and painting, and then latterly photography. So visual art has always been very important to me and a big source of inspiration. When I started to gradually get a group of photographs together over last year, I thought it would be great if we could include these because they kind of document the story of the album in visual terms anyway. So I talked to Rob Ayling, who's from the record company Gonzo Multimedia, who release my albums. And he'd actually been working on a few different box set projects. Actually, one was an Iona box set that I did. But he'd worked on one with a guy who was a musician, songwriter, who'd similarly taken a whole group of photographs whilst he was on tour, documenting a tour. And they'd released this in a box set version with a really high quality hardback book of the photographs. So it seemed, because they'd had a precedent at doing this kind of limited edition thing, Rob was really up for doing that for my album. So there's the standard CD version, like a CD version with a bonus disc, and also this photo book version. So I've probably got I can show you it actually. It's just over here. Yeah, I was quite thrilled with being able to do this because I've always wanted to, or thought about getting photos in a book at some point. So this is the photo book that comes with the
Yes.
box version
Hmm.
with various photos. Uh, and yeah, I was thrilled with the copy of the
Oh, brilliant.
the print. It's really great
Yeah,
quality.
absolutely.
So anyway, we made 100 of those, and already I think 90, something like 93 or 94 of them have been sold, maybe more actually. There's only like literally 3 or 4 left as we speak. Um, but if there's enough demand, we may be able to do another print run, but it's an expensive item to make, so possibly not. So
I'm sure.
yeah, the box version comes with that and 6 postcards, a signed certificate, and the 2 CD version. It's really great package. So I was thrilled with that.
Well, congratulations having that, and I mean, and congratulations just having the whole journey of this album, and to the
Yeah,
sustaining of your love, which took all
yeah,
these
indeed.
these many months. Did I hear right that you initially were going to have a ceremony on the cruise to the edge? Was that the original?
Yes, that was it. Yeah, it was going to be quite a prog wedding, I suppose. Really, yeah. In fact, that was going to be in at the end of March, 2020.
Hmm.
Yeah, we had Neil Morse was my friend was going to officiate the wedding.
Perfect.
He's actually a pastor. Um, and Joyce Francis, who's the wife of Percy Jones from the band Brand X, or used to be with the band Brand X.
Hmm.
She was going to be the head bridesmaid, and she'd made Sharon like this great headdress and same headdresses for the other bridesmaids.
Oh wow.
And then my friend John Young from Lifesigns was going to be the best man, and so it was going to be quite a prog wedding, but sadly that was not to be. And eventually we got married. There was just myself, Sharon's mum, and the pastor and a photographer friend, all wearing masks because this was pre vaccines
Yeah.
when we got married in the retirement facility that Sharon's mum lives in. So it was a lovely service.
I'm
But
sure.
hopefully, at some point next year, COVID allowing, we want to do a bigger celebration. Probably either side of the Atlantic, uh,
Hmm.
one in England, one in Baltimore.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Well, through some choppy waters, but you guys made it. That's brilliant.
yes, yeah. I mean, thank goodness for Skype. I mean, we
Yes.
literally spent hours every day on Skype through the whole thing, and that was a real lifeline.
I bet. Yeah, absolutely. So, looking in on a solo album like this, how much of the creation process is truly a solo endeavor, and how much do you rely on the other core musicians in the project?
Yeah, so well, all the music is written by me and arranged by me. From that point of view, it's very much a solo project. But then the musicians I get into any project are people I think can really contribute something of what they do themselves to the project to make it much more special than if I'd recorded all the parts myself. So yeah, I remember actually on my first solo album, Veil of Gossamer, which came out in 2004, my initial idea was kind of like to do a Mike Oldfield and try and play everything on it,
Right.
which I could probably just about manage to do, but adequately on some instruments. But then I got kind of halfway through the writing and realized that really, if it's going to be a really good album, I need musicians who are much better than me on other instruments. So yeah, so for this particular album, there are certain people who I've worked with for years, like Troy Donockley, who plays uilleann pipes and whistles, um, and Martin Nolan, who plays some whistle, and Frank Van Essen on drums and violins and viola.
Hmm.
I've worked with all of 3 of those for many years in Iona, so I know their playing styles very well, and I know that they're going to create fantastic sounds.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, on bass on this one, my friend John Poole from Lifesigns, I really wanted him involved because uh, he's probably one of the best musicians, one of the most intuitive musicians I've ever met. Just incredible ears and inventiveness, and really very much aware of the whole kind of prog music history. So, but he kind of brings almost like a punk element to his playing, I think.
Hmm.
So it's always very exciting and but really inventive. And I just had a feeling that he'd really work well on the material.
Yeah.
And then singing wise, my friend Sally Mania, we've been working together as a duo and in my band Celestial Fire for a number of years.
Hmm.
And she was the obvious choice to interpret some of the songs. And then someone I'd not worked with before, but who's a friend of Sally's, called Ian Hornell, handles all the male lead vocals. Ian and Sally were at music college together, and then he left and has worked with various people like 10cc and Jeff Lynne's ELO and
Yeah.
the Gentle Giant offshoot band Three Friends. He sang
Ah,
with them,
right.
and he also is a great bass player and stepped in on some dates on the Anderson Wakeman Rabin. Not sure if I got those names the right way around, but
Oh, really? Yeah. Nice.
Anderson Rabin Wakeman. Yeah, he played bass on one of their tours. So he's another musician, great singer, but really steeped in the kind of progressive and art rock music scene. So as soon as I heard his voice, I knew he'd be perfect for the album.
Yeah. They have some wonderful duets, and he
Yeah,
supports her really well. Yeah.
yeah. So I do. I mean, I do quite kind of sophisticated, I suppose, demos where I'll program all the drum parts myself and that, but and bass parts. So and then leave it up to the musicians as to which bits they want to keep out of what I've programmed and which they want to change. Because I think with you need to have trust with the musicians you work with to allow them space to be themselves and to trust that what they'll come up with is going to be better than what you would have just come up with yourself. So, and that was the case on all the tracks with the musicians on the album, thankfully. So,
Yeah. Well, you picked them well. They sound fantastic, and I'm always fascinated by musicians such as yourself who are equally strong on more than one instrument. And so, you've been hired for your keyboard abilities in some bands, and then at other times as the guitarist.
mm.
So, when it comes to your own music, are you primarily composing at the keyboard, or sometimes do you do guitar as well?
With on this album, it was a real mixture of both. Actually, there's about four or five tracks actually that started out on. I've got a very small 12-string travel guitar um, made by a company called Vintage in the UK, and it's just a great sounding instrument. It's really inexpensive, but it's been the source of lots of ideas. And just on a few creative days, I put down loads of kind of riffs and things in various tunings on it, and eventually those became the basis to some of the key songs on the album,
Hmm.
such as To Gain the Ocean, that started out as a riff on the travel guitar. Girl in the Magical Sky was another one. Rain and Sun was another. So they all started out just as guitar riffs and chord progressions. Um, whereas some of the other pieces had big sections composed on keyboard,
Hmm.
either improvised and then refined, or sometimes I'd have specific ideas in mind. Um, so yeah, it's whatever really creates the spark initially.
Right. Lyrically, you're working a lot with Lynn Caldwell on this
Mm.
album. Tell us a little bit about that collaboration.
Yeah, well, I've known Lynn for quite a number of years. She's Canadian originally, but she's the wife of Martin Nolan, who replaced Troy Donockley as the pipe and whistle player in Iona.
Right.
And he's an Irish guy from Dublin, which is where they both live. So I'd been aware that for a while that Lynn was also a poet, but it was only maybe two or 3 years ago when I began to start seeing her posts on Facebook. She's got a blog, and sometimes she puts um, some of her poems from the blog on Facebook. And I read one day, which I thought was really amazingly descriptive and beautifully written. Um, and although I do write some lyrics, I really like to collaborate because music's the thing I do best. And although I come up with ideas for songs and occasional lines, I wouldn't call myself a really great lyricist. So I really wanted to have someone who'd have the kind of visually descriptive language that could really put into words the journey of the album. And so, yeah, having read this poem by Lynn on Facebook one day, I was blown away by it, and contacted her and asked her if she'd be interested in working together. And literally everything she came up with was just fantastic. She really got the whole idea behind each song, and there were very few lines that I asked her to change. Um, so it was a really good working relationship, and yeah, I'm thrilled with how it's turned out lyrically.
Yeah, that's wonderful. As you're speaking of the poetry, it reminds me of the album you played on with the Downes-Braide Association, which has so much spoken poetry woven into it.
Yes, yeah, the guy on there who does that, Barney.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's created a really unique sound, I think, and atmosphere having his poetry on there. Yeah, that was one of the things I really love about the Halcyon Hymns album.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I suppose I'd because that album I'd recorded that prior to my album. So I suppose I had in mind kind of having a poet involved rather than just kind of someone who wrote pop lyrics or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of being more creative. So there is actually one short poem that's spoken that's on my album, um, that is part of the track "Girl in the Magical Sky."
Hmm.
Yeah, which I was really thrilled with, which really creates the atmosphere for the rest of the track.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, and then we've got a number of instrumentals on the album too. But it's interesting because like a song like the Cathedral Thinkers, it has
Mm.
such a rich theme behind it and story there, yet you chose to make that an instrumental. So how do you decide when to have the lyrics tell a story or not? And then how do you determine how an instrumental will convey the meaning?
Yeah. Well, with that particular track, the I quite often I'll just come up with titles that I think will be good song titles, um, and I'll either see those, they'll be inspired by a film or something I read in the newspaper or whatever. Um, but I'm often looking out for just titles for songs that can be quite descriptive, and then I can write music based around the title. Um, and that was the case with Cathedral Thing because I had the title there first after reading an article in on the BBC News website, and it was talking about climate change actually, and how in the past people many people like masons, which is where the term comes from, worked on um, like buildings or whatever, um, and they would never see the finished product in their lifetime. Um, there's some fantastic cathedrals, as you probably know, in England,
Mhm.
and they were these. Many of them were built kind of from about the 12th century, but not finished until 200 years later. But the stonemasons who worked on them, they basically gave their whole life to this project that they wouldn't see the fulfillment of in their lifetime, but knew that someday it would be glorious. And in the article, it talks about how we need to have this kind of cathedral thinking, this idea of looking much further ahead than just like the 5 years of a presidential um, span, or even our own lifetimes. If we're going to really tackle the problems and issues that we're presented with in the world at the moment. Because we so many times we look at things in a very short-term way, and which is like really detrimental to our future as a species.
Hmm.
So it's looking at it from that point of view, but also from an artistic point of view as well. Like the second Iona album was called The Book of Kells, and that was inspired by an 8th century illuminated manuscript, this incredible piece of work, which is still in Trinity College, Dublin, in Ireland. And similarly with that, scholars reckon it took 30 years to produce such an incredible piece of art. Each page is incredibly detailed in its decoration and illustrations. So again, the scribes who were working on that weren't sure that they'd see the finished product in their lifetime, but they were doing it partly to honor St. Columba, who was their kind of father figure, who died a complete 100 years previously, and partly to honor God, and partly to create a beautiful piece of art. So I just thought that was a great idea and inspiration for a piece of music. This idea of cathedral thinking.
Yeah, can you imagine that yourself? Like, what if you were helping to compose a piece that you knew the whole goal was to not release this for 100 years, and you would never hear the finished piece, and maybe you were just going to compose, I don't know, 2 minutes of a 100-minute piece. That would it's so different than how you go about. You did this in 18 months essentially, your new album, and you get to
Yeah,
feel that finished product, which is must be so satisfying. But perhaps
yeah,
it's satisfying in another level, to something larger than yourself that won't even see its fruition in your lifetime.
yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, well, even now we can, there's music that's being listened to that's um, created in the composer's lifetimes that they never saw released or never saw the full potential of. So yeah, it's an interesting thought as to what will happen with music that's being released now in the
Yeah.
future. Um, yeah.
That's true. Right. There's an interesting, beautiful piece on the album instrumental called Infinitude.
Mm.
And I read that it was initially based on an improv that you had between you and Frank, and then you scored it out into this beautiful symphonic piece. So I'm curious, if this was originally an improv, what instrument were you initially playing in this improv, and are you even on the final track here?
Yeah. So yeah, Frank Van Essen. I mean, we've been working together probably for about more than 30 years now. Um, yeah, he was about 20, I think, when we first worked together.
Hmm.
And he's an incredible drummer, but he's also um, very unusually an incredible violinist and violin improviser on the violin with a beautiful tone. And he's one of those musicians that when that you can connect with, and instantly that there's a real rapport and something deep, that when you play together you create something that's beautiful. Um, and so yeah, we realized years ago when we started playing together, that when we improvised together, things just gelled. I've always loved improvising on the keyboard, and not necessarily improvising in a jazz way where you improvise over a chord sequence and play single note lines kind of thing, but more in a, I suppose, more of a Keith Jarrett kind of way, actually almost composing on the fly, and coming up with different harmonies and that. And when I play with Frank, amazingly, he can kind of follow what I do somehow. It's like an intuition. You know, I'll be changing keys all over the place, and he somehow manages to flow with that. And we've created some pretty amazing improvisational pieces. We did a lot of that live with Iona, and also on some of the Iona recordings. And so in 2018, we just got together for about a week at his house working on ideas, and part of the time we just spent improvising. And I'd be on a keyboard and he'd be playing violin, and some of those pieces ended up on an album of his called Meditations of a Sound Mind, which is really beautiful. And then this one piece I wanted to use on one of my albums. And basically I had a string kind of, well, various string layers set up on my chord Kronos, and from a few different string libraries, so that I could bring in different sounds, like a more staccato sound or a different sustained sound. And we also had a sound from Frank's computer from a library called Omnisphere. Recorded all of the, so we recorded my playing on the keyboard as audio, like an audio file, and also as a MIDI file, so that later I could go back and score the whole thing out if necessary, or change the sounds. But basically this improvising lasted just over 8 minutes, and we didn't edit anything initially, and that's what you hear on the bonus disc on the album is the improvisation basically as it was. I think I changed one or two notes here and there on the keyboard, but not very much. And then Frank sent me another improvisation, a violin improvisation for me to use, but I ended up using the original one and just a couple of phrases from the new one. And that was it really. It was just one of those moments where everything came together. So then I scored the whole thing out in Sibelius using the MIDI file. And Frank multi-layered violins and viola, and we got a cellist called Jonas Pap from the Netherlands to multi-layer some cello parts. And then, so there are some of the original keyboards in there just very quietly. And then I think I added like an atmospheric keyboard part that comes in very subtly in a few places.
Gorgeous piece. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, let's look at what seems to be the centerpiece of the album, Ghost Light.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. How does this one sit in the context of the whole album for you?
So this started life in 2018 when I was in the studio with Sally, and we were working on some ideas that we weren't sure could possibly be a duo album, or possibly a Celestial Fire Band album, which is the band we have together occasionally. I'd found this poem by a 19th century Victorian poet called Arthur O'Shaughnessy, and it was basically about the importance of the arts and music. It opens, "We are the music makers. We are the dreamers of dreams." So we used some of those lyrics. Sally sang them, and so we had like a couple of minutes of of a piece. And then I had the idea that maybe we could, the theme could be this idea of a dystopian future where through genetic modification, people's response to religion and their spiritual side and the arts was kind of taken out with the view that they could become more productive human beings for the government. But then eventually their spirit couldn't be quelled, and they'd rise to meet the great spirit, kind of, and so it would be a triumph in the end. So that was the original idea I had for the lyrics, and then we wrote a few lines with this idea in mind, and then left it. It didn't progress any further until the pandemic. And ironically, some of the things I was writing about then, the fact that religion would stop and the arts would stop, actually happened, for different reasons. In the pandemic, churches were closed because people couldn't meet together because of spreading the virus, and theatres closed as well. So, in a sense, what I was going to write about came about in a completely different, unexpected way.
Wow.
So I thought, that I should work on this and maybe try and shift the theme slightly. And then about the same time, I saw a post on Facebook from my friend Chris Curran, who's a lighting designer for Steve Hackett, and fantastic lighting man. This is really close to the beginning of the shutdown in the UK. And he posted a picture, and it was a picture of a single light bulb on a stage in a theatre, in an empty theatre. And it was titled Ghost Light, and which I didn't know, but apparently in theatres overnight, quite often a light is left on the stage, and the light signifies the return of the performance. Usually the next day, but it was more profound at this point because theatres were closed in the UK for like 18 months or something, and no one knew when they would reopen. So the ghost light had a much deeper significance. So I thought of changing the title to Ghost Light, and including in the middle of the piece, like a kind of tribute to all the backroom people who you don't normally hear about, but who were all kind of out of work in this terrible time. Carpenters who work on stage sets, and booking people, and lighting guys, and sound guys, all of whom were out of work. So in a sense, the track is a tribute and an honor to those people. But then as I thought about it, I was thinking more kind of in spiritual terms as well, that we're not only waiting for the reopening of the arts and theatres, but people who are Christians are looking even wider than that to the return of the great light, that would be the return of the Messiah, kind of thing. So the track kind of works on different levels, really. It's like a spiritual layer to the meaning of it as well.
Yeah, and looking over the lyrics, I can see there are a lot of concurrent things going on there.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's so many lyrics, so which is why the track is so long.
Yeah. You mentioned Steve Hackett, by passing there, and I love the instrumental on there as night falls. It's brief, but it's actually one of my favorites. It's just such a beautiful piece, and it does call to mind Steve Hackett's playing as well in the electric. So I wonder, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but how big an influence does Hackett or Gilmour or any number of other electric guitarists play on you, consciously or subconsciously?
Yeah, actually, no one's ever asked me that. No, it's not. Uh,
The top three most asked questions.
yeah. Um, yeah, I think any instrumentalist. I mean, the goal is to create your own sound and your own voice, but in order to get to that space, that place, you imitate. You listen to lots of other instrumentalists on whatever instrument you're playing, and gradually, I think over time, what you come, what you well, hopefully, what you play takes on its own kind of style as you absorb the different influences. Because I think no one player is exactly the same, because everyone's listened to different records and different music and different guitarists. Um, so yeah, certainly growing up, I listened to Steve Hackett and um, Dave Gilmour and Richie Blackmore and Jeff Beck and um, John McLaughlin, Alan Holdsworth, so many great guitarists, and you try and emulate, learn their solos in the initial years. I listened to a lot of blues guitarists as well. My sister, who was almost 9 years older than me, was a blues singer and had all these great blues albums and Jimi Hendrix albums, and Woodstock. So I remember one of the first solos I learned was the Going Home solo from Alvin Lee off the Woodstock album, and then riffs from my sister's Jimi Hendrix albums. Um, yeah, there's lots of music that was absorbed, uh, and eventually you kind of try and arrive at your own style. I think one of the things, certainly over the time from when I started playing with Iona back in 1989, when myself and Dave Fitzgerald formed the band, we wanted to have influences from Celtic folk music. And once I was actually at a gig one day playing in a blues band in Wales around the time we were doing the first Iona album, and I really wanted to have the sound of pipes on the album, but I wasn't sure if it was what kind of pipes, whether it was like Scottish bagpipes, because I didn't really know much about different uh, varieties of pipes at that time. I just knew that that was a sound that I was hearing in my head. And at halftime and on this blues gig, the guy who was doing the sound played this music, and it was just unbelievable. I'd never heard anything like it. And it was like a rock band, but the lead instrument was what turned out to be Uilleann pipes, Irish pipes. So I asked the guy, I went up to him and said, "What? This is fantastic, this music. What is it?" Because it was kind of progressive, but folky as well. And it turned out to be Troy Donockley's band, U Slosh, which he had up until 1992. So this was pre-internet and everything. So I managed to track down the drummer. I got a phone number for the drummer. Troy actually didn't even have a phone at the time. So I tracked down the drummer, and he turned out Troy didn't live that far from me, only like 28 miles or something. And eventually he set up a meeting and got Troy to come and do some sessions on the first Iona album, which turned out great. And then he subsequently joined the band. So basically, for the whole time of Iona, which is like 26 years, I spent a lot of time playing with an Irish pipe player and listening to the inflections on the pipes, and how first Troy and then Martin would bend the notes and sustain the notes and add various ornamentations. So I tried to incorporate some of these elements into my guitar playing as well, because I thought this would be quite a kind of interesting thing to do, rather than the usual influence being blues guitarists or kind of shredding guitarists.
Right.
So I think over the years, it's kind of become natural to phrase in a similar way to pipes for me. So I hope that's one aspect of what I do that kind of makes me sound slightly different to some of these other guitarists.
Yeah.
So using like the whammy bar to bend certain notes and that kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Right, absolutely. Well, I'd say it certainly paid off. I mean, if there was an award for guitar solo of the year, it would likely be given to you for yours on Lifesigns' Last One Home.
Oh
You know,
yes,
that was it's like an epic 2.5 minute um,
yes, yes.
solo. How does it feel to be offered a canvas like that, and how do you approach that?
Mm. Um, yeah, I think on that particular piece, so that's Last One Home is a piece that John Young co-wrote with John Wetton, and originally it was recorded on an album by a band they had called Quango.
Hmm.
Um, but the idea of it is that there's this boat that's out to sea fishing, and it doesn't return, and everyone's worried, and eventually it it's the last boat to return home, and everything is good. But I think at the point, so it's quite an emotional song about potential loss and disaster. And for me, the point where the lyrics stop is where where the guitar solo begins is really continuing the emotion of the lyrics, but in musical form, and kind of trying to heighten what John was singing about. Um, so it really felt like on that particular piece, it should be quite a lyrical solo, an emotive solo, rather than like lots of notes. Um, so yeah, just I mean, we'd already previously done that track live lots of times. Um, so I tried to keep the spontaneity of what I do live. And that's kind of how it turned out, really.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
just remembering now as you're saying that I think John mentioned to me that I think he said you asked that it be extended, so
yes,
the cycle
that's,
the
yeah,
cycles be extended so you could continue on carry on a little longer.
yes, yeah. I think there was maybe 2 or 3 rounds originally, and I think there were 4 or 5
Yeah.
round guitar sequences. Yeah, it just felt like it could really build and build in emotion, build the intensity.
Yeah, well done.
But I think, yeah, I mean, hopefully one of the things I've brought to Life Signs is a kind of more lyrical approach in my playing. That's more. I mean, it just seemed to work well with um, John's writing and John's playing. That the guitar should like really be maybe slightly more melodic and emotive in the music. So
Hmm.
I think that that approach has really worked well in the context of the band.
Yeah, and then with the Downes-Braide Association, are they really writing most of the arrangements themselves and then kind of bringing you in for your piece, or are you more involved with the with some of the arrangement contextures like what is it, at the end of the King of Sunset? There's like a whole section that sounds like it probably was created by you.
Yeah, it was. Yes. Yeah. No. Well, Chris Braid is really the kind of the main songwriter and the producer. Um, and Jeff sends him great keyboard ideas and things which he kind of incorporates into his Chris's songs. That's kind of the way it sort of works. And then Chris sends me a demo and basically gives me carte blanche to do whatever I want,
Mm.
which is really great because some producers have a really specific idea in mind. But Chris is really supportive and very open
Mm.
to ideas. So yeah, for that bit on that track, I just felt like it could morph into this other world. So I recorded the whole thing, all the acoustic instruments and even some drumming on the guitar and stuff, and
Mm.
I think some mellotron
Mm.
sound as well. So which was I wasn't sure at first whether I should put any keyboards on there because Chris and obviously Jeff are both masterful keyboard players, but I really felt that it was more about getting ideas across, and Chris and Jeff are both open to that, so it works really great.
Yeah.
Um, um, so yeah, so I've had a hand in some bits. There was I think it's maybe the opening track. I forget now, but there was one track where I suggested some different harmonies, and they went with that as
Mhm.
well. So yeah, it works really well. It's a great collaboration. Um,
Yes, yes, I love the album. It sounds like you're recording more, so I'm really happy to hear that.
yes, we just literally I was recording some this morning for another track,
Ah,
which is going to be on the next DBA album.
lovely, lovely.
So yeah, I mean it's a really good combination of personalities and skills, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I love Chris's voice and songwriting. It's just
Yeah,
it's
yeah. I mean, he's a genius, really, and his production work is
mm,
and ideas for sounds, and that's really good.
yeah, yeah. I really hope he gets a lot more attention through it because he certainly deserves it, and all of
Yeah,
us do.
yeah.
Well, Dave, thanks so much for talking with us for a bit today, and
Pleasure.
just thrilled with all that you're offering to the world, and may it continue. Even though now you've been reunited with Sharon, may you still find some time for the recording studio. Although I hope you two are really enjoying each other.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, Sharon's hugely supportive of everything I'm doing, which is fantastic.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, we definitely work well together as a team. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, very Merry Christmas to you, and we will see you in the new year.
Fantastic. Yeah. Good to see you, Scott.
All right. Cheers.